Family reunions have always been a mixed bag for me. On one hand, you've got the warm, nostalgic moments, catching up with cousins, hearing old stories, and sharing laughs with relatives you only see once a year. But then, there's my Uncle Steve. I'm 30 years old, and over the years, I've learned that no matter how successful or happy I might become, Uncle Steve always finds a way to make me feel like I'm not quite measuring up. It's like he's on a mission to keep me humble, but not in a supportive way, more like a constant reminder that I'll never be as good as he expects. And trust me, it wasn't a surprise when I found myself face to face with him at this year's reunion. I knew what was coming, and I wasn't in the mood for it. It started as usual, with everyone gathering around the food table, catching up with one another. My cousins were chatting about their jobs, kids, and travel plans. But Uncle Steve, well, he didn't waste any time making his grand entrance. He walked in with that smug grin of his, a sort of "I'm always right" aura surrounding him. I was still holding a plate of food when he sidled up next to me, giving me a quick once-over before glancing at my clothes. "Still living in that little apartment of yours? Huh?" he asked, as if he already knew the answer. "I mean, you're pushing 30. Don't you think it's about time you settled down? Maybe bought something more respectable?" I tried to brush it off with a smile, but it stung. I had been working hard to build my career, but real estate and the big house were things I was still striving for. I didn't want to admit that Uncle Steve's words were getting to me, but they always did. It was hard to explain it to anyone. He wasn't a monster or anything, but his passive-aggressive remarks always made me feel like I wasn't good enough. As the reunion went on, the tension between us only grew. Every time I spoke, Uncle Steve would somehow steer the conversation toward my supposed failures. "So, how's the job going? Any promotions yet? Or are you still stuck in that same position? You know, people your age should be managing teams by now," he said with a casual sneer, as if it was a perfectly normal conversation. My cousins noticed, but they were all too polite to say anything. I could tell they felt uncomfortable, but no one was going to challenge him. Uncle Steve was the kind of guy who thrived on making everyone feel small, so no one ever stood up to him. By the time dessert rolled around, I was fuming, trying to keep my cool while he jabbered on about his own achievements, making sure to emphasize how much better his life was than mine. It wasn't just that he was successful, it was the way he talked about it, like it was all because of his superior intelligence and hard work, while people like me just didn't have the same drive. That night, after the reunion had started to wind down, I overheard a conversation between my parents and some other relatives. They were talking about Uncle Steve's latest business venture, how he was expanding his company, and how he really made it, didn't he? It was as if everyone around me was just waiting for me to take my place, accepting that I would never match up. The constant comments, the sideways glances, it was becoming unbearable. I'd had enough. It wasn't just the jabs at my career or living situation, it was everything. Uncle Steve had a way of making me feel invisible or like I didn't deserve any of the good things in my life. I wasn't sure how I was going to do it, but I promised myself that somehow I'd find a way to shut him down, to show him that he couldn't keep making me feel small. I was done being his punching bag. A few weeks later, after a lot of sleepless nights and some serious work on my part, I did something that felt absolutely insane at the time. I purchased a house, a massive one, in a neighborhood I could barely afford at the time but knew I'd be able to handle with some smart decisions. It was everything I'd ever dreamed of, a spacious home, a big yard, and, most importantly, a symbol of everything I had worked so hard for. I knew it wasn't the perfect time, but sometimes you've got to push yourself out of your comfort zone. I kept the news to myself, enjoying the thought of what would happen when Uncle Steve saw it. It wasn't just about getting back at him, it was about proving to myself that I was capable of more than his dismissive attitude ever gave me credit for. But there was one thing I knew for sure. I wanted to do it in the most dramatic, unforgettable way possible. The next family reunion was approaching, and I couldn't wait. I wasn't going to tell anyone about my new house until the moment was right. I wanted it to be a surprise. When I walked into the house for the first time, the sense of pride was overwhelming. This was it. The moment had arrived. At the reunion, Uncle Steve was, predictably, at the center of attention. He was boasting about his latest trip, talking about his newest investments and how much money he was making now. As usual, he glanced over at me and smiled, but it wasn't a smile of encouragement. It was the kind of grin someone gives when they think they've already won. "So, how's the apartment?" he asked, his tone dripping with sarcasm. "Still living small, I assume?" I took a deep breath and smiled back, keeping my voice calm. "Actually, no. I moved." The words hung in the air for a moment, and I could see the confusion in his eyes as he tried to process what I was saying. Moved? What do you mean moved? Uncle Steve's voice had a little edge to it, as if he didn't quite believe me. Without saying another word, I pulled out my phone and showed him a picture of my new mansion. His jaw dropped. Is that your place? He stammered. The smugness from before was completely gone, replaced by something I could barely describe: disbelief, perhaps even a hint of envy. I didn't respond immediately. Instead, I let him stew for a moment. It felt so satisfying, watching him try to comprehend what I had just dropped on him. The other relatives had begun to notice, and soon enough, a small crowd had gathered. They were all staring at my phone screen, mouths agape. I could feel my heart pounding, but this wasn't about gloating. This was about finally standing up for myself. But before I could say anything more, Uncle Steve took a step back, his face flushed. That can't be real, he muttered under his breath. You're just pretending, aren't you? Show me more. I couldn't help but laugh. This was exactly what I'd expected from him. No, Uncle Steve wasn't going to accept that I could ever be successful without some sort of catch. But what he didn't know yet was that this was only the beginning. I leaned in slightly, savoring the moment, before I said, "It's real, Uncle Steve. Every inch of it." His face twisted. "There's no way," he said, shaking his head as if he couldn't quite believe it. And that's when I knew he wasn't just shocked. He was scared. Scared of the fact that maybe, just maybe, I had proven him wrong. I could feel the tension building in the air, the uncomfortable silence that followed as everyone waited for his response. What he didn't know was that I had even bigger plans for him. This wasn't just about showing off. This was my revenge. And the story wasn't over yet. But just as I thought he was about to snap, he turned around and walked away without another word, leaving the crowd awkwardly whispering behind him. The silence in the room was deafening for a moment, the kind of silence that only comes after a tense, unresolved confrontation. Uncle Steve's sudden retreat was so unexpected that it left everyone in a state of confusion, unsure of what had just happened. I stood there, holding my phone out, watching as he disappeared into the crowd, his back stiff with what I could only describe as defeat. I felt a rush of satisfaction, but at the same time, there was a knot in my stomach. I hadn't planned for him to walk away like that. I wanted more than just shock and confusion. I wanted him to understand that he had underestimated me, that I wasn't the nobody he had always believed me to be. Cousins and relatives who had been listening in on the exchange slowly started to approach me, eyes wide in disbelief. "Wait, you really bought that place?" my cousin Jen asked, her voice laced with awe. She'd always been one of the few who treated me with respect, never questioning my abilities. I nodded, trying to keep my tone casual. "Yeah, it's been a work in progress. Took some time, but it's worth it." Uncle Steve's absence created an uncomfortable gap in the air, one that no one seemed eager to fill. It was like the whole family was waiting for him to come back and explain himself, but he didn't. He wasn't the type of person to show vulnerability, and I knew that he was probably seething inside, trying to justify what had just happened. The rest of the evening carried on, but the tension never fully lifted. I couldn't help but notice the looks exchanged between the relatives as they whispered to one another, probably wondering what had set Uncle Steve off. I tried to act normal, talking to a few of my cousins, but all I could think about was how Uncle Steve had left the reunion in such a hurry. It didn't sit right with me. I had expected him to lash out, to make some snide comment or try to undermine me further. But instead, he just disappeared. Days passed, and the quiet satisfaction I had felt at the reunion began to fade, replaced by a growing sense of unease. I hadn't heard from Uncle Steve, not even a text or call. Part of me wondered if he was avoiding me, unsure of how to handle the situation. But another part of me knew better. Uncle Steve wasn't the type to retreat without making a move of his own. He would come back. He always did. And sure enough, a few days later, I received a text message from him. It was short, cryptic, and full of that same condescending tone I had become so used to over the years. "Nice house," the message read, "but it's nothing more than a temporary fix for a life that'll always be incomplete." I stared at the words for a while, my anger rising as I processed the message. It was clear he was still trying to belittle me, trying to convince himself that I hadn't won. His words felt hollow, and I knew it was just his way of coping with the fact that I had, in some ways, surpassed him. I couldn't let it slide. Not this time. This was the moment I'd been waiting for. The moment I could finally put Uncle Steve in his place once and for all. But it wasn't going to be enough to just show him my success. He needed to understand the full extent of what he had done to me over the years, the way his words and actions had chipped away at my confidence. It was time for the next phase of my plan. Over the next week, I started putting things into motion. I'd already seen a few cracks in Uncle Steve's perfect life, small things that most people wouldn't notice. A shady business deal that had been mentioned in passing by one of the family members. Rumors about his company's financial struggles. I wasn't interested in revenge that was just about showing off my success. I wanted to expose the truth about his own vulnerabilities. I knew it wouldn't be easy, but the satisfaction of taking him down a peg, or maybe even more than just a peg, was too tempting to ignore. I reached out to a few contacts I had in the business world, asking about his company. It wasn't hard to get the information I needed. The more I dug, the more I found. Uncle Steve had always presented himself as a financial genius, but in reality, his empire was built on a shaky foundation. There were debts, failed investments, and even some legal issues that had been swept under the rug. I didn't want to bring this to light without good reason, but Uncle Steve's actions had made me feel small for so long. I had worked hard to build my life, and I was tired of him pretending like he was the only one who could succeed. It felt like time was finally running out for him to maintain that perfect image. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized he needed a taste of his own medicine. The opportunity came sooner than I expected. My parents invited me to another family gathering, one that would be small, more intimate, and, coincidentally, the perfect setting for what I had in mind. Uncle Steve would be there, of course, and I knew it was the perfect time to turn the tables. But I didn't want to just expose him in front of the family. That would have been too easy. I wanted him to feel the weight of his own pride and arrogance first. I wanted him to come to the realization that everything he had built on the backs of others was about to collapse. I arrived early at the gathering, giving myself enough time to prepare. I didn't want to rush anything. The last thing I wanted was for Uncle Steve to know that I had something planned. The others started trickling in, and soon enough, Uncle Steve arrived. His usual cocky demeanor was intact, but I could tell there was something off about him. He seemed more on edge than usual. It wasn't long before the conversation turned toward business, and of course, Uncle Steve was the one leading it. He was talking about his latest ventures, making grand promises about future success, but I could see through it. I wasn't the only one who had noticed his cracks. My mom, usually a fan of Uncle Steve, seemed more skeptical than she had in years. That's when I saw it, the perfect opening. Uncle Steve had just made a boast about his latest project, something that sounded too good to be true. I took a deep breath and leaned in. "That's funny," I said, my voice calm, "because I've heard a few things about your company that don't exactly match what you're saying." His eyes snapped to mine, narrowing slightly. "What are you talking about?" I smiled. "Oh, just some rumors about your latest investments, the legal issues, the unpaid debts. It's funny, because you've been so eager to talk about how great you are, but you've been hiding a lot from this family, haven't you?" I could see the color drain from his face. "I wasn't done yet, though. It must be exhausting, pretending to be something you're not, huh?" His jaw clenched, but before he could say anything, I continued. "I mean, I can't even imagine what it's like, constantly hiding from the truth." And here I thought I was the failure. The tension in the room was unbearable. Uncle Steve opened his mouth to respond, but nothing came out. It was like I had caught him in a lie he couldn't escape from. But just as he stood up, ready to leave, I knew I hadn't quite finished with him yet. There was still one more thing to reveal, something that would leave him speechless for good. I'll just leave it at that for now. Let me know when you want to hear the rest. The room felt like it was holding its breath. Uncle Steve stood there, rigid, his face pale and his fists clenched at his sides. I could see his mind racing, trying to figure out what to say. He wasn't used to being caught off guard, let alone exposed. I could practically hear the gears turning in his head as he fought to maintain his composure, but I could tell the facade was cracking. "You have no idea what you're talking about," he finally said, his voice low and tight with anger. "I built my empire with my own two hands. I didn't have it handed to me on a silver platter like some people." His gaze flickered briefly to me, his words dripping with contempt. "Maybe you should focus on your own life instead of trying to tear others down." The words stung, but I wasn't about to let him get away with it. I knew he was trying to shift the blame onto me, to make me the villain in this story. But I wasn't the one who had been belittling him for years. I wasn't the one who had made it his personal mission to remind me at every family gathering that I wasn't good enough. No, that was all him. Well, Funny you should mention that, I said, my voice unwavering. Because I've been focused on my life. It's funny how that works, isn't it? When you don't waste your time stepping on others, you actually get somewhere. Uncle Steve's face darkened. You think you know everything about me? You think you can just waltz in here and cut the crap? I interrupted. I know exactly who you are. The self-made millionaire who's one bad investment away from losing everything. The perfect businessman who's been lying through his teeth to this family for years. It's about time someone called you out. The room was silent, all eyes on Uncle Steve as the reality of what I just said sank in. I could see the muscles in his jaw twitching, his anger bubbling just below the surface, but he wasn't speaking. He couldn't. He knew I was right. I think we all deserve to know the truth, I continued, my voice calm but firm, especially when it comes to family. Before Uncle Steve could respond, I turned to my phone, tapping the screen and pulling up a document I had prepared earlier. It was a report on his company's financial troubles, everything from lawsuits to overdue bills to shady business practices. I had even found a few articles from news outlets that detailed his questionable investments and the rumors that had been circulating for months. The evidence was damning. I slid my phone across the table toward him. Why don't you take a look for yourself? He stared at the screen for a moment, his face contorting as he processed the information. It was like watching a man slowly come to terms with his own downfall. The arrogance was gone from his posture now. In its place was something more vulnerable, fear. But it didn't last long. He snatched the phone from the table and looked at the screen, his eyes scanning the pages with growing disbelief. This is nonsense, he muttered, though it was clear he wasn't convinced by his own words. His hands were shaking now, the truth starting to set in. Who gave you this? Who's trying to bring me down? I leaned back in my chair, watching him squirm. I'm not trying to bring you down. I'm just showing everyone what you've been hiding. What you've been hiding from them for years. His lips trembled, and for the first time in a long while, Uncle Steve looked small. He was a man who had always been the loudest in the room, the one who made sure everyone knew how much better he was than the rest. But now, he was nothing but a shell of that confident persona. The silence in the room was unbearable. No one said anything, but I could feel the weight of everyone's gaze. I could feel their judgment, their disbelief at what they were witnessing. I had never seen Uncle Steve like this. Not in all the years I'd known him. And it made me wonder, had I been too harsh? Was this really how I wanted to bring him down? But then I remembered all the times he had made me feel like nothing, all the moments where he had belittled me, where he had crushed my spirit with his words. Steve, my mom finally said, her voice trembling. I could tell she was caught between supporting her brother and confronting him about the truth. She glanced at me, then back at him. What's going on? Is this all true? Uncle Steve didn't answer. He was still staring at the phone, his eyes flicking back and forth as though trying to find a way out. His pride was shattered, and he knew it. There was no spinning this, no way to make it look like anything other than what it was. He had been caught. I stood up slowly, my gaze never leaving him. You've always looked down on me, Steve. You always thought you were better, smarter, more successful. But look at you now. You're just a man with a house of cards waiting to collapse. The room seemed to close in on him as everyone waited for him to respond, but he didn't. He simply turned and walked away without another word. His exit was abrupt, leaving everyone in stunned silence. I watched him leave, a strange mix of satisfaction and guilt swirling inside me. I could hear murmurs behind me, relatives whispering about the situation, speculating on what was really going on. But it didn't matter. What mattered was that for the first time in years, I had made Uncle Steve see me, really see me. I had finally stopped being the nobody he had always treated me as. But as I stood there, the weight of what I had just done began to sink in. I wasn't sure what the fallout would be, and I wasn't sure if I had done the right thing. But one thing was clear. I had taken back control. Uncle Steve's reign of intimidation was over. The rest of the night was a blur. People came up to me, offering half-hearted congratulations, but I could tell the mood had shifted. Everyone knew something had changed. I had put the king of the family in his place, but I wasn't sure if I was ready to deal with the consequences. I never heard from Uncle Steve again after that night. Months went by, and he disappeared from family gatherings. There were whispers about his business crumbling, about him retreating into his own world of shame. But for me, it was more than just watching his downfall. It was about reclaiming my own story. I never intended for things to get this far. But once you've been underestimated for so long, you start to wonder what would happen if you finally fought back. And I did. The aftermath wasn't what I had expected. At first, I felt a strange satisfaction, like I had finally evened the score. But that feeling quickly faded as the reality of what I had done set in. Uncle Steve's absence at family gatherings became a point of constant speculation. Some people sided with him, whispering that I had humiliated him for no reason. Others, more than I had expected, told me they were proud of me for standing up to him. They'd all seen how he had treated me, and though no one dared say it out loud, it was clear to them that he had gotten what he deserved. But I hadn't anticipated the ripple effect it would have on the family. My relationship with my mom grew strained. She was torn, caught between being loyal to her brother and standing by her own child. It was awkward, and every conversation with her seemed to be laced with unspoken words. "You didn't have to do it that way," she told me once, her voice soft but disappointed. "You could have handled things differently." But could I? The man had spent decades treating me like I was invisible, like my dreams were worthless. What was I supposed to do? Let him keep pushing me down until there was nothing left of me? I couldn't do that. And then, a few months after that night, something unexpected happened. My business, something I had been quietly building for the past couple of years, started to take off. What started as a small, side hustle had become a full-fledged success, and my profits were growing at an astonishing rate. I was no longer the nobody my uncle had labeled me as. My success was now undeniable, and my name was starting to get recognized in business circles. I never mentioned it to anyone in the family, especially not to Uncle Steve, who was still nowhere to be found. But I couldn't ignore the fact that as my life was flourishing, I had become the person he had always mocked. In a twisted way, his words had driven me forward. Every time he told me I wouldn't amount to anything, it fueled me to prove him wrong. Then came the day I received a call from him. It was early morning, and I had just finished an important meeting when my phone rang. The caller ID showed an unfamiliar number, but I answered anyway, figuring it was business-related. "Is this my name?" the voice on the other end asked, hoarse but unmistakable. It took me a second to recognize it, but when I did, my stomach dropped. It was Uncle Steve. "Uncle Steve," I said, my voice tight. "What do you want?" I need to talk to you," he said, his tone barely above a whisper. I've been thinking about everything that happened, about what I said, about what you did, and I need to apologize." For a moment, I didn't know how to respond. I had never expected this, certainly not from him. The man who had always been so proud, so arrogant, was now calling to apologize. "You want to apologize?" I asked, disbelief in my voice. "After everything you've said and done? After all the years of putting me down, you're just going to apologize?" "I was wrong," he said, his voice cracking slightly. "I was angry, and I let that cloud my judgment. I was jealous of what you were doing, of what you were becoming. And I couldn't believe what I was hearing." My mind raced as I processed his words. "Jealous? Of me? I didn't think you would ever succeed," he continued, almost in a whisper. "I thought I was helping you, but I see now that I was just holding you back. I'm sorry. I'm truly sorry for what I said." For a long time, I didn't say anything. My thoughts were a blur. On one hand, I could feel the temptation to just hang up the phone and walk away, to leave him to stew in the mess he'd made for himself. But then another part of me, the part that had been yearning for some form of closure, wanted to hear him out. "You've got a lot of nerve calling me now, after all these years," I finally said, my voice low but controlled. "But I'll tell you something. I'm not doing this for you. I don't need your apology. I don't need your validation. What I need is to never go back to the person I was before you decided to tear me down." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Then Uncle Steve spoke again, quieter this time. "I understand. But if there's anything I can do to make things right, anything at all." I thought about it. And for the first time in a long while, I realized something. I had been so focused on getting revenge on him that I had never stopped to think about what would happen afterward. What did I want from all of this? What did I hope to achieve? "I'm not asking for anything from you," I said finally. "You made your bed. Now you can lie in it." And with that, I hung up. A few weeks later, I got a letter from him in the mail, a formal one. Inside was a check, a generous one, for a business venture I had been working on. Along with it, a short note, "For all the times I doubted you. For all the times I should have been proud of you. I'm sorry." It wasn't the money that mattered. It was the fact that he had actually done something to try and make amends. But even then, I didn't need it. My success was no longer about proving anything to him or anyone else. It was mine. And that, more than anything else, was my victory. Uncle Steve never showed up at family gatherings again. Over time, his business collapsed, just like the reports I had shown him had predicted. He disappeared into the background, his empire crumbled, and I heard through the grapevine that he had left the country to try and rebuild his life elsewhere. But I didn't care. The truth was, I didn't need him anymore. I had finally found my own worth, and that was the best revenge I could have ever asked for.